This supersized 9-patch tutorial was created to assist patrons of Farmland Public Library who wanted a quick and easy way to make baby quilts to donate to Morgan's first gift. First, we will start by marking our cutting mat. I have used Post-it notes to mark a space 21 inches wide and 18 inches tall. The Post-its did not stick well, and I would recommend using painter's tape instead. Next, fold your fabric in half selvage to selvage. This is the way it comes off the bolt. Selvages are the uncut or fuzzy edges. Then fold the fabric again the other way so you have a piece approximately 18 inches by 21 inches. Place the folded edge on the bottom left side of the mat. Stop here and double check your fold placement. This is critical. Now, trim your piece to 18 inches by 21 inches by cutting off the excess from the right and top edges. These should be your selvages. Now, measure over 9 inches from the right side of your fabric. Before you cut, double check your measurements. One wrong cut can ruin a piece of fabric. After you cut, do not move your pieces. Now, measure down 9 inches from the top. Once again, double check your measurements before you cut. Unfold all of your pieces one by one and mark each with the size if you wish. Repeat this cutting process for your other piece of fabric. Let's look at some cutting mistakes. The fold on the bottom right, that's wrong. Cutting from the left, that's wrong too. Your pieces won't match up correctly if you don't cut according to the pattern. Now we're ready to lay it out. Lay out your quilt according to the pattern. You'll notice I've opted to use only 2 fabrics rather than 3. I wanted to show you that there were other fabric and color options available than what was shown in the pattern. Now is the time to watch for directional fabric. Directional fabric has a right side up and an upside down. Notice the upside down giraffe on this quilt. From the top, select a long border piece and a corner square. Place the right sides of the fabric together and pin. I like to put my pins 3 to 4 inches apart. Line up the edge of your fabric with the 1/4 inch mark on your sewing machine. The edge of my presser foot is a 1/4 inch, but every machine is different. Remove pins as you come to them. You should never sew over a pin. When your seam is sewn, press the seam flat. Then press toward the dark with the dark fabric on top. Pressing correctly is very important. I'll show you why later. Your seam should now look like this on the back. Repeat the process with the other corner square. Then repeat with the other end. Now we're ready to create the middle unit. Pick up the middle square and one side piece. Place right sides together, pin, and sew. This will be pressed toward the dark as well. Longer seams are harder to press. I recommend starting in the left corner and pressing toward the right side. Repeat with the other side. Now we are ready to sew the 3 pieces together. Place the top row on the middle unit with the right sides together. Now you will see why pressing is important. If you press correctly, your seam should be laying in opposite directions. This allows you to nest or butt those seams together. Place a pin here. After you've pinned the seams, pin the entire side. Pinning the seams first is important. You'll see why in a few minutes. After pinning, stitch together. As you approach pinned seams, you might notice a bubble forming. Pull the fabric out flat and continue sewing. Try to work any extra fabric into the seam. Don't worry, this takes practice. Use this method to stitch on both end pieces. When you press your piece, check your corners. We pinned our seam so our corners would meet nicely. Here is an example of a corner that should have been pinned better. Sometimes you will have a little overhang of fabric. If it's less than 1/4 inch, it's okay to trim it off. If more than 1/4 inch, you should tear out the seam, repin, and resew. Now, cut your batting and backing to fit the finished size of the quilt top. I like to lay them together to gauge how much to trim. When trimmed, lay your batting on the floor with your backing face up on top of it. Next, lay your quilt top face down on top of that. Match the edges and pin the layers together at the first seam. Fold back and make sure you see the right side of the backing and the right side of the quilt top. Now let's look at some mistakes. Wrong side of the backing, wrong side of the top, and wrong side of the back. And you should never ever see your white batting. When you're sure you have it right, pin all the way around, keeping your edges even. This is difficult and my least favorite part. You'll want to leave an opening to turn your quilt right side out later. I like to double pin my opening. It's easy to forget and sew your entire quilt shut. Now sew all the way around the quilt, back stitching at your opening. I like to use a 1/2 inch seam allowance to make sure I catch all of the layers. If you have a seam that wants to stand up, with the needle down, raise your presser foot, tuck the seam under, lower your presser foot, and continue. Stop a 1/2 inch from the corner. With your needle down, raise your presser foot and rotate your quilt 90 degrees. Lower your presser foot and continue sewing. When you're finished, check to make sure you caught all layers in your seam. Notice here I'm very close to the edge of my batting. I put this back in my machine and widened the seam. Now, find your opening and put your hand between the quilt top and backing and start pulling. There's no special method to this, just keep working it until you have it right side out. Can you see my mistake? Once you've turned your quilt right side out, press your edges so they are crisp. If any seams are rolled in, pull them out before pressing. Find the opening, roll the raw edges to the inside, and pin the opening closed. Here, I vary my method from the pattern. Rather than quilting all over, I simply shadow quilt my seam lines. Line your presser foot up at the edge of the seam and sew the length of the quilt. Note, this stitching will show, so you should use a coordinating thread color. For my quilt, I chose a variegated blue and white. The pattern says to hand stitch the opening shut. I sew it shut on the machine using a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. I continue to top stitch the entire perimeter of the quilt. Now you're done! I hope you found this tutorial helpful. If you have any questions, you may contact me at the library or join one of our designated Morgan's First Gift sewing days. Call 468-7292 for more details. Good luck with all of your sewing adventures.